Have you ever wanted to capture a photo of a waterfall with that dreamy, smooth motion blur, but you found that the bright daylight turned your image into an overexposed mess? Or maybe you wanted to shoot a portrait with a beautifully shallow depth of field, but even at your camera's fastest shutter, the image was still overexposed. That is where these little tools come into play. Neutral density filters, or ND filters. ND filters are like sunglasses for your camera. They reduce the intensity of all the light entering your lens without changing the colors, letting you use slower shutter speeds or wider apertures even in bright conditions. For example, if you're shooting in bright sunlight and want to get that cinematic motion blur in your video or a silky water effect in a photo, the ND filter can make that possible. Or maybe you're a portrait photographer who loves a shallow depth of field but doesn't want to deal with blown out highlights. Again, ND filters are your best friend. In this video, I'm testing out this new tool of mine to see what effects, if any, it has on my photographs. It is a K&F Concept variable ND filter with a polarizer combo. Now, let's get something out of the way up front. Variable NDs, like this one, have quite a reputation. If you've spent any time in photography forums or watched reviews here on YouTube, you might know that variable ND filters often get a bad rap among photographers. Some of the most common complaints: color casts that make your images look unnatural, strange vignetting in the corners of your frame, and the infamous X shadow that appears when you push the filter to its limits. And these are all valid concerns, especially when you're working in film photography where every shot counts and you can't easily correct things in post. So in this video, I'm going to address those concerns head on. And I'm going to take this variable ND polarizer combo out for a spin, shoot an entire roll with it, and see how it holds up. We're going to test for color consistency, sharpness, and any weird optical artifacts to see if this filter can deliver on its promise, or if it's better to stick with fixed ND filters. And also, to be clear, this isn't a review of this product. I have no affiliation with K&F Concept. I'm just curious what I can and cannot achieve with this variable ND. Now, this particular filter has a rotating ring that allows for 5 stops of intensity for the ND. ND2 to ND32, or 1 stop to 5 stops. Just so we're clear, let's say that I want to do a soft motion blur effect, and so I want to keep my shutter open for a long time. I'll want to close down my aperture as small as I can. In the case of this Zenzinon 80mm lens, that would be f/22. Now with this filter, I have the option of reducing an additional 5 stops of light, or the equivalent of f/128. And that means that I could leave my shutter open 5 times longer than if it was simply closed down to f/22. So instead of half a second, I could have the shutter open for 16 seconds, if my math is right. So I'm opting to test this filter by finding 6 compositions that I want to document and utilizing all 5 stops on this variable ND. They say that closing down all of the way is where you start to see some funky results, and I want to see if that's the case. So it's bright and early in the morning. I'm going to head over to Central Park and see what I could find, and I'll see you all on the other side. Okay, I found my first composition that I'm going to be doing. It's right behind me. We've got this bridge with some water. This is, I guess, the Central Park Pond. I don't know if you heard that, but the geese are not happy that I'm here. I'm going to be using the 50mm lens because I want to get kind of a wide image, and I want to get the bridge in there as well as a bunch of this kind of lightly flowing water. I want to see if I can get the water to look kind of smooth. It isn't moving enough where I feel like that's going to happen, but we're going to try it anyway. And I'm going to get my camera set up and we'll see how it looks. So right now at f/22, we are looking at 1/8 of a second, okay? I'm going to take the photo and then I'm going to add the ND, and we are going to close down another stop, which will get us to 1/4 of a second, and we'll see what the results are. Okay, correction. We're going to be shooting 1/4 of a second, which means when I put the filter on, we are cutting out another stop. We're going to go to 1/2 of a second. So let's do it. So my camera's internal meter is saying we need to be closer to 1 second than to half a second. I'm not exactly sure why. I don't think more sun came out, or maybe more shade came out, or maybe the variable ND is indicating more than one stop of light. We should be at half a second, but right now I'm gonna go in between 1 second and half a second and see how that works. Okay, I'm over here at this place where there's all these little boats on this little dock here. We're gonna try something a little bit different than what I've been doing. I'm gonna try to open the aperture to about a 5.6 and then use the ND to help me from there. And I just kind of want to see what the difference will be if I take a photo of 5.6 without any ND versus shooting at 5.6 and using ND to compensate. Okay, so we are at 1/60th at 5.6. So I'm thinking when I add the ND, I'm going to add all 5 stops on the ND and see what shutter speed it wants me to shoot at. So it looks like my meter and logic and math wants me to shoot at half a second, which makes sense. That would be 5 stops slower than 1/60. So we're gonna go ahead and take this photo. All right, so to reiterate, we're at f5.6, shooting at half a second with the variable ND maxed out to all 5 stops. And we're gonna see what happens. So I'm taking a picture of this giant ass building. Yeah, I've got quite a bit of foreground water going on, and we're gonna take a photo of this nice blue sky behind it too. So it'll be interesting to see what I could do, maybe use some polarizer and see what that looks like. But we're gonna try to do 3 stops on the variable ND and see how that works, shooting at f22 to start with, and then adding the ND and adding the additional shutter that we are gonna need. So we'll find out what that is and I'll get back to you. All right, we're gonna add the ND at 3 stops. And we'll see what happens. Close down 3 stops, I should say. All right, my meter appears to be reading 1 second with the ND closed down 3 stops, and we'll see what happens. So I'm trying something kind of specific here. I am going to be shooting the water. There are a ton of ripples, and I want to see if I could really smooth those out. And it's also a lot darker, so I'm going to have the shutter open a lot longer than I've been doing. I'm going to start at f22, no ND, and it's looking like, based on my meter, I got to be open for about a half a second. Now that's before I add any ND, so I'm going to try to add the ND and go all 5 stops on the ND. Or alternatively, what I could do is go f16 and start there, because then I can go full 5 stops with the ND and slow it down 8 seconds again. Yeah, I think we're going to try that actually. So we'll go f16 for, I guess, a quarter of a second, and then go up to 8 seconds with the variable ND. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so I had to close down to 22 and adjust the ND. It's not quite fully, oh, there's a cloud, hold on. So we're gonna do an 8-second exposure at f22 with the ND pretty much all the way closed down. All right, I hope that one came out okay. That's gonna be an interesting one. That was a full 8 seconds at f22 with the variable ND turned pretty much the entire way. And my light meter said it was all right, but we'll find out.
He asked for like a small that looks more like.
All right, we did it. Shot the entire roll, tested out the variable ND from K&F Concept. I'm excited to see how it turns out. Yeah, going back to the studio now. I'm going to the lab to drop this off, and see you back in the studio. All right, hello everyone. We are back in the studio, and we're looking at the results of the ND filter test. And I want to just run through them on Lightroom. There were some interesting results, but all in all, I'm very, very pleased and happy with this variable ND from K&F Concept. Again, this isn't like a review of this, but I guess you can sort of treat it as a sort of real world application of this particular filter. So let's go ahead and take a look at, I have Lightroom pulled up. I've got all of the photos lined up. We're going to do a bit of a side-by-side comparison. And just so I have my notes here, I can pull them up for you all to see. Photo number 1. So on the left, we have the version with no filter, and we shot that at f22 at 1/4 of a second. Yeah. And then when we went over to add the filter, we only closed down 1 stop on the variable ND. Let me pull it out of its case. I basically didn't move it at all on the exposure ring, because when you keep it at its minimum, it's only cutting out 1 stop of light, or so it claims. I think when I did this, it might have indicated that it needed a little bit extra, a little bit more than 1 stop. But yeah, so we went from 1/4 of a second shutter to 1/2 a second shutter with the filter. And just looking at the results here, what we get is a slight color cast. And we're kind of going to see this throughout. But what's odd to me, and I want to be upfront, this is the way that my lab sent them back to me. So like this one was definitely the first photo on the roll, and I know that I shot it without the filter. But what's weird is that we kind of get the reverse results when we look at the rest of the photos, but we'll get to that because in the filter version, and we can kind of see that the water gets a little bit more smoothed out. I don't know, even over here, maybe it looks a little bit more smoothed out over here. It's possible that these files got switched or something, but just based on what I was given from my lab, we get this kind of like reddish color cast over here with the filter version. Over here, this little piece of brush, little twigs and bramble over here, all kind of turn a little bit red, whereas over here, they're more in the green, yellow area. Not sure what to make of that, but it's something to take note of. But otherwise, what's interesting is, as we know about ND filters, it's supposed to be like pure representation. It's supposed to really not, in theory, give you any sort of color cast. It's purely just supposed to knock out light and additional stops of light. Not the worst thing in the world, especially when we're doing this stuff. Some of this stuff can be corrected in post-production, and I'm not too worried about it on that end. In theory, I like this, but there are some other examples where we see some different results. Again, this is also one-stop difference. So yeah, let's move on to the next photo and see what we get. Photo number 2, this was all at f/22 with the 1/8 over here with no filter. So 1/8 of a second. And we could even see that water does look pretty smooth, but not as smooth as when we go over to the filter version and we get this at half a second exposure. The wind was kind of whipping around, so this water was moving quite a bit. So that water just smooths out. And in terms of that color cast coming back, we kind of get a bit of the opposite over here, because over in this photo, we get a little bit of a reddish hue in the tree line and whatnot. But over here, it kind of calms down a little bit. If anything, this has maybe the most minimal color cast of any of the photos on this little test here. Yeah, this photo is a nice representation of, I feel like, what we want out of this variable ND. There's also this light leak. Ignore that. That has nothing to do with the filter. But moving up in the photo, we do see that the sky turns a little bit more blue. I probably did have the polarizer rotated a little bit just to sort of see what would happen. And maybe it's cutting out a little bit of haze over here in the sky, making that sky a little bit darker. This is a pretty good representation of it. And let me just once again, yeah, half a second. This is looking pretty good. And so this was only 2 stop difference. Yeah, so we went from 1/8, 1/4, 1/2, right? Yeah, so this would only been a 2 stop difference. So we were probably closing this down to the first. There's a little dot right there that tells you what sort of ND you're at. So I was probably at the second one down from the minimum. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. This one's interesting because, just going to my notes, this one I did something different, because for the other 2 I was sticking at an f/22, but for this one I went with f/5.6, and I kind of wanted to see what we can get out of a bit of a shallower depth of field. And what I think we got was some pretty cool results. I think I'm going to make an entire video doing sort of the exact opposite of this one, where I try to take portraits, or at the very least try some more shallow depth of field stuff using the variable ND and see how that works, because that's what this is also used for. It's used for shooting portraits in harsh daylight when you want that shallow depth of field, but you don't want those highlights to be blowing out constantly. Once again, the no filter version has this reddish hue to it. Not sure why that is, but I actually feel like it gets a little bit corrected with the ND applied, because it's clearest to see in this dock right here. The dock over here is kind of this reddish, whereas over here we get this sort of yellowish tint to it. And even in the tree line back here, the trees kind of have this reddish hue. Back here, it's much more orange, yellow. But then we also look at the blue, because the blue is also getting affected. All of our colors are being affected, I guess is what I'm getting at. The green gets a little bit darker. The blue becomes a little bit more like an aqua blue as opposed to this sort of purplish blue that we get over here. And the water, of course, is getting smoothed out because we were at a half a second here with the filter, and we were at 1/60th of a second with the no filter version. So going from 1/60th to half a second, this would have been the full gamut of this variable ND. This would have been all 5 stops added all the way to the max. It even says max. Let me see if I can focus on that. Yeah, there it is. It says max on there. So this would have been the entire ND. And I think this gave me some really, really cool results. All right, here we get an interesting result. I don't see so much of a color change in here so much as I see the water shifting a little bit, the water getting smoothed out compared to these like crazy ripples in the water over here. It gets very smoothed out over here. And maybe we see a little bit of darkening in the sky, but mostly I'm seeing a bit of a contrast difference between these two. This one over here with the no filter, let's look at our settings real quick. So this was all at f22. We were at 1/8 of a second with no filter and a full second in the filter version, which is interesting. I kind of would have expected there to be more of a difference in the water, but also, yeah, 1 second. We're also getting a bit more contrast for this one. So one of the things I probably should have brought up when doing this was reciprocity failure. And I don't know if this is a reciprocity issue, but it does seem like it might be a little bit underexposed, which I think when I went back and watched the footage, I mentioned how it should have been at a half a second, but maybe I went to 1 second or something like that. Let's just do the math real quick because 1/8 to 1 second would be quarter, half a second. So this would have been a 3-stop difference on the variable ND, but it does seem like this could have benefited from maybe another stop of exposure because over here in the building, look, this building looks very bright and well exposed and less contrasty versus over here, we're getting quite a bit of contrast and the colors pop a little bit more. But overall, this is a pretty nice comparison of what we could do with this filter. Moving on to the next one. All right, this one is maybe one of my other favorite of the bunch, just in terms of going wild and really pushing the limits of what this filter could do. Let's look at our notes right here. So this was, I started out doing this at f16. The reason I had to do that is because the Bronica can only shoot for 8 seconds. I knew that I wanted to max out the variable ND for all 5 stops. So in order to do that, what I had to do was shoot at f16 at a quarter of a second without the filter. And then I had to close down the iris 1 stop to f22 in order for me to shoot at the full 8 seconds over here. But a complete 8-second exposure, that water is completely smoothed out. The thing that I didn't account for, which I should have, was that the wind was moving this brush and bramble in the foreground here. So it's a little shaky. I should have probably picked something that was a little bit sturdier to actually see the difference in what's in the foreground versus the water moving. There's also a light leak. I think that that's what this big pop of highlight up here is due to, because as we can see, that doesn't really show up in the other version. But what's interesting, I should have called this out before, this foreground bramble brush twigs stuff completely changes color and rendition when we add the ND. And I'm so curious as to what happened here. I don't know if there was a cloud or something. Maybe this was just getting hit by an extra burst of sunlight, and then over here, maybe it wasn't. But that ND is just cutting out whatever highlights were happening in these twigs right here. So here's our last photo that we're looking at here. Sort of similar results that we got all around, mainly that we're seeing a little bit of a red color cast. This one, we're shooting at f11 the entire time and going from 1/60th to 1/2 of a second. So if we do the math there, we go from 1/60th, 1/15th, 1/8, 1/4, 1/2. So this would have been about a 4-stop subtraction. And we're getting what we expect from this, which is the water smoothing out quite a bit. What I'm not happy that I lost was all these shadows of these buildings. That was kind of why I took this, because I really liked that I was seeing these shadows of the buildings, or the reflections of the buildings, I should say, in the water. We lost some of that over here. I don't know whether that's because the water was moving or because maybe the polarizer was in effect over here. The sky gets a little bit darker, but not too much darker. Yeah, not entirely sure what was going on with this one. I think I was probably nearing the end of my trek, and I was like, I just got to take a photo. Let me just set one up by the skyline. There were some people playing music next to me. Yeah, this is a interesting result, but far from the most interesting result of the rest of them. We do lose the blue almost entirely in the water, and that is not cool. It kind of gives it this like brown, yellow, muddy look with the filter version, and not particularly a big fan of that. What we are seeing, or what we're not seeing, is something that people complain about when they're talking about variable NDs, especially on the cheaper end. K&F Concept is on the cheaper end, very much the cheaper end of variable NDs, especially a variable ND with a polarizer combo. But what a lot of people talk about when they talk about these things, and I alluded to this at the top of the video, you sometimes will get like this X that's crossed across your image as you close down entirely. And I didn't see that at all in any of these images. Even if I go to the develop tab and I kind of start messing around with the contrast slider or anything like that, mess with the blacks, I'm not seeing very much vignetting. I'm not seeing that X. And I gotta say, I'm honestly pretty happy about that. The fact that I wasn't getting any crazy artifacts, any crazy vignetting, any of that X mark, makes me a lot more excited to go out and shoot with this variable ND in the future. And you could probably bet your bottom dollar this won't be the last time you see this in any of my videos, because I've got a few things planned and I'm excited to test out with this filter. And yeah, if you use variable NDs in your work, let me know what I could do to improve my results, or things that I should test out or try, experiment with. Let me know if you like this video by heading down to the comments. Let me know what you think I should try next with this variable ND. Also, be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on the channel. Do all the normal stuff. Become a member. Go to my print shop. You can help support me by going to that and buying any prints of my work. You could also check out this video over here that I made about a novella that I published at the beginning of the year, and you can consider buying that. There's also a novel that I self-published at the summer of last year. You can go check out both of those videos and head to those links and consider buying a copy of my writing. With that, I will see you all next time.